strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to another Warrior Creed live stream after a short break over the summer as we took some time, for some of you who followed on social medias, to go visit the Smoky Mountains in Tennessee. Today's topic, without further ado, and thank you those of you who've been waiting for the show to resume. Today's topic is on your screens. UK Labour traps itself in Gaza, September. Now, the purpose of selecting this topic for today's stream is because we are in the month that the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer, along with other countries such as France, unilaterally announced that they would recognize a Palestinian state at this month's UN General Assembly. But there is a great deal of shuttle diplomacy that has been occurring in the meanwhile, and today's Times leads with, on the topic at least, leads with this story, and that is that the headline there you can see from the Times of London today: Israel is not committing genocide in Gaza, government concludes. And that is a very significant piece of news because the unilateral declaration or announcement that the UK was planning to declare a unilateral recognition for a Palestinian state at the UN was something that has greatly upset the Israeli side. And of course, the judge sitting at the ICJ, Karim Khan, who put out the concern around Netanyahu's arrest and the warrant for concern around an investigation into possible genocide, was also a British judge. So this announcement in the Times today is incredibly significant. And the Times article reads, we're just going to read it for you from the screens. The headline states, we read the headline. The text states, the UK does not consider Israel's actions in Gaza to be genocide, David Lammy said, in a significant shift in position on the issue. Until last week, the UK government had maintained that the question of whether Israel had committed genocide was a matter for the courts and not for national governments to determine. However, in a letter to the chair of the International Development Committee last week, Lammy said that an assessment carried out by the Foreign Office had concluded that Israel's actions did not constitute genocide. As we said, this is very significant because the ICJ judge, Karim Khan, who puts out the arrest warrant from the perspective of the ICJ, not as a British judge, happens to be a British citizen. It's also the case that the current UK Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, effectively threatened Israel with the unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state, joining other countries such as France at this month's UN General Assembly. And so this gesture, that it's now the official position of the UK government, not the official position of the ICJ, nor the official position of any other UK recognized court, but rather just the position of the executive branch of the UK government, and that is Keir Starmer's Labour government and his Foreign Office. They've taken the view that it's not a genocide. This is important in diplomatic terms, though of course it's damaging for Keir Starmer's Labour government, for his government with his own domestic UK support base. What we're going to do is dedicate the rest of this stream explaining exactly why he's done it, though at the same time, by no means aiming to elevate Keir Starmer into some form of international statesman, because he's not. There are other things going on that are forcing his hand. But at the same time, he's in a trap of his own making, because we're now in September. And if Keir Starmer unilaterally recognizes Palestine, along with, say, France and Macron and other countries that were threatening to do so, they would have fired their last shot. And if in diplomatic terms that doesn't lead to anything except a gesture, then they are left with very little credibility to negotiate on that international stage thereafter. And so this gesture that Keir Starmer's government doesn't recognize the official what's going on in Israel officially as a genocide, may well be Keir Starmer seeking to position himself for a slight readjustment of expectations with regards to how much he thinks he can do unilaterally or indeed with countries such as France and Macron. So we're going to explain some of that in a moment. But for the meanwhile, we're going to just continue reading from the Times article, news on that UK official position regarding genocide. And to continue reading from the article, it states, Lammy said that the Foreign Office had carried out several assessments on the question of genocide, including when the government decided to exempt British-made parts for the F-35 jet from the suspension of 30 arms export licenses to Israel. The UK government suspended export licenses to Israel last September because of a risk of British-made weaponry being used in violations of international law in Gaza. However, it exempted the supply of British-made components for the US-produced F-35 fighter jets because it was a part of a wider NATO defense program crucial for maintaining international peace. Many of you remember this. All arms exports to Israel from Britain have been stopped, except for those components for the US-made F-35 jets, which Israel is using in the bombardment of Gaza. So Lammy as Foreign Secretary and Starmer as PM, their position, this is pre-Angela Rayner reshuffle, of course, triggered by her resignation as the Deputy Prime Minister, but nevertheless, the position has remained, and that is that Israel is engaged in what as far as the outside observer can see, their position is that Israel is engaged in war crimes and atrocities in Gaza, just as Hamas have been, but it doesn't amount to genocide, and therefore, summarizing what it appears to be Keir Starmer's official UK position, and therefore, though we've restricted arms supplies in terms of weapons to Israel, if it had been a genocide, we would also have been bound to restrict those F-35 fighter jet component parts. But because it's not a genocide, we can still supply the F-35 fighter jet component parts as part of our NATO responsibilities. But we are maintaining the ban on all other weapon supplies, British weapon supplies to Israel, because even though it's not a genocide, there are other war crimes being committed that we want no part of. That summary appears to be what Keir Starmer's government position as of today is, from an outside observer's perspective, appears to be the position that they've taken. And of course, it's all summarized in the Times articles that we just read for you there. Now, the reason Starmer and Lammy, who's now, of course, in line for, well, he's currently the interim deputy leader because of the Angela Rayner resignation. But the reason they were forced to take this position is because Sarah Champion, another Labour member of Parliament, wrote a letter to Starmer seeking that clarification. Again, reading from the Times, his letter was in response to a strongly worded letter from Sarah Champion MP, chair of the International Development Committee, who demanded answers on how the UK's policy of continuing to supply parts for F-35 fighter jets that have indirectly been sent to Israel complied with its international duty to prevent genocide. So you can see there, that's what triggered the question. Remember, Sarah Champion is the Labour MP who bravely raised her head above the parapet on the transgender and women's rights, on the grooming gangs, underage rape grooming gangs topic, and was roundly criticised and condemned by her own political allies at the time, only to have been vindicated in the long term, as all of us who spoke about that topic have been, because time is vindicating. It's this Sarah Champion who raised the topic in the form of a letter to Keir Starmer. She is somebody that at least we can say reliably stands on her opinions, because she clearly did over the grooming gangs topic, the underage rape grooming gangs topic, when very, very, very few others were. Take that from us, because we were one of them. And in terms of parliamentarians, she was among those that you could count on one hand who spoke out on the topic when very few others were. So Sarah Champion has been somebody known to be who stands on her principles. She's the one who wrote this letter to Starmer. The response came from Dave Lammy, stating the official UK government position that what's happening in Gaza is not a genocide. We on Radical Media have never used the word genocide to describe our official position on what's going on. Rather, we've used the word ethnic cleansing because ethnic cleansing has a lower threshold legally than genocide. We've always stated that our view on whether or not to call it a genocide should be referred to any subsequent judgment that comes from the ICJ if they were given the opportunity to determine the matter. And the reason for that, having a law degree background, is simply because we wish to respect that ongoing legal process. But the view that what's going on involves ethnic cleansing is a view that has a much lower legal threshold, which can be met simply by observing the fact that there is a forcible movement of the population due to fear of being bombed. So, and that's perhaps why Lord Sumption, the former Supreme head of the UK Supreme Court, that Lord Jonathan Sumption, also known like Sarah Champion, and one hopes that you think like Radical Media, also known to be somebody that does stand on his views. Lord Sumption famously stood against the COVID mandates at the peak of the hysteria by providing editorial comment pieces and other such media articles to press such as the Times of London, stating his opposition at the time when it was needed. So hats off to Sarah Champion and Lord Sumption for those two feathers on their cap. That Lord Sumption is the same Lord Sumption who we've played here on Radical Media before, a video of which makes it very clear, as former head of the UK Supreme Court, that he believes genocide is the most plausible explanation for what's going on in Gaza. But the fact that he used the word plausible is precisely why we here at Radical Media have not said categorically it's a genocide. Go back to all of our live streams, you'll find that what we've said is we take the view it's an ethnic cleansing, because that's the work that the word plausible was doing in Lord Sumption's assessment of the situation to our former LBC colleague, Matt Fry, who was interviewing him. We'll put that video back in the Radical Dispatch tomorrow. We just don't have it to hand right now because for a shortage of time in going through our old archives to find it, but we will include it in the Radical Dispatch tomorrow. But Lord Sumption's use of the word plausible is doing that lifting to say, look, we need a proper legal judgment to say with certainty that it's a genocide. In the meanwhile, the word ethnic cleansing is serious enough to describe the problem there. And of course, that doesn't exonerate anything that Hamas has done, including the terrorism that the jihadist group Hamas has done on their side, nor, of course, Hezbollah, nor any other non-state actor terrorist organization that seeks to harm Israeli non-combatants, as they've just recently done just in the last few days. So none of this is to say, of course, that there aren't war crimes being committed by Hamas. Though Lord Sumption's view, when asked specifically about what's going on in Gaza, was that the genocide was the most plausible explanation. Absent an ICJ ruling, and of course, considering all the problems that the ICJ prosecutor temporarily stood aside, Karim Khan is facing, then the UK government position is the only thing that the UK has left to go by officially. And so now the official UK government position, as leaked in a letter by David Lammy, communicated to Israel as Foreign Secretary, is that the UK government position takes the view it's not actively a genocide. And the reason they provide in the letter is because they take the view that intent for a genocide, crucially, is still missing. That's the reasoning that was provided as well. Now, another point here is, look, to see at the Times, the bottom of this article, this segment that we've quoted from the article today. This is a crucial period of diplomacy in the Israel-Gaza war for Sir Keir Starmer, who is set to recognize the state of Palestine later this month, unless Israel meets certain conditions. So that's the real point here as to why we suggest that this is coming to the fore right now. And it's to soften the blow and allow for some form of diplomacy to remain between Keir Starmer's previously rather strong-arm position, which was the threat of unilateral recognition, and the Israeli position, which is far, far away from that. And so this gesture that the UK government has now announced perhaps is an attempt to heal some of that diplomatic rift that emerged. And of course, by placing the Shabana Mahmoud into the position of Home Secretary to replace Angela Rayner, who had to recently resign due to a domestic tax scandal, and that is HMRC's relentless pursuit of stamp duty on properties in the UK. Thank you very much, HMRC, for bleeding us all dry. Nevertheless, Angela Rayner got caught attempting in some form of error with regards to her stamp duty and had to resign as Deputy Prime Minister. Shabana Mahmood has been appointed in her main portfolio role, Rayner's, and that's Home Secretary. Lamy has taken Deputy PM for the meanwhile until the position can be filled. So Shabana Mahmood in that position has caused Starmer some backlash from his own backbench for this perceived position that Starmer's government seems to have towards Israel, and that is to be rather somewhat sitting between gesture politics and on the fence. And people have been circulating old clips of the newly appointed Labour Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood and her position on Israel, as Palestine Solidarity Campaign has recently posted, and you can see it here on your screens. This is what Home Secretary Shabana Mahmood once thought about Israel. Follow her advice from 2014. So this clip we're going to show you is the current UK Home Secretary from 2014, and it kind of demonstrates the bind that the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer for Labour finds himself in a trap of their own making, because this is a matter of record. People aren't forgetting that as recently as 2014, his now Home Secretary had the following to say about Israel.
The government benches had to stand up and say, I have received many emails from my constituents about this issue, so please keep up the pressure on your members of parliament. Go to their advice surgeries, take 20 people with you and ask them to justify their views on Palestine and on Gaza. And if they say they support Gaza and support the plight of the Palestinians, ask them to evidence it and to take some action to show solidarity. That's how we can make a difference, because Israel's actions, its killing of children, its bombing of schools and hospitals must be condemned without equivocation. We know what they've done is wrong. If David Cameron fails to speak out, that is a moral outrage. He may stay silent, but we will never stay silent. So let out an almighty roar and tell this government we will not stay silent until the Palestinians are free.
Well, that's a problem for Keir Starmer, having promised to unilaterally recognize Palestine this month with that lady as his Home Secretary, while from the other end of his mouth, allowing for his Foreign Secretary David Lammy to tell Israel they don't believe it's a genocide. And then also, while saying that, still restricting all but the F-35 component parts in terms of weapon sales to Israel. It must be getting very painful for Starmer to be sitting on that fence. Let's not forget that his own support base is rebelling against him because, of course, imagine if MPs as senior as the Home Secretary only as recently as 2014 was speaking like that. Imagine the pressure he's facing from the Labour rank and file, and then beyond that from their voter base. And you can see how painful it must be for Starmer to be sitting on a shaft of that white picket fence, not picking a side. It is going to get harder for him as the month of September rolls on. And Starmer's finding it not only difficult to control his backbench, his support base, but also his backbench MPs, some of whom have left and have decided instead such as Zara Sultana, to join Jeremy Corbyn and set up a alternative to the Labour Party, your party, or whatever they're calling it these days, a new name for a new party, who will contest in any subsequent general election held in the UK in those Labour strongholds on the issue of Gaza, and are most likely to steal many votes from Keir Starmer's Labour support base, especially in Muslim majority areas. And this victory of Keir Starmer in the last general election, though it translated into an overwhelming majority of parliamentary seats, our viewers and listeners will remember at the time when we responded about that general election, we stated it very clearly. It was the most marginal victory for a very, very long time in the UK. Some seats only won by a handful of votes, including seats of secretaries of state such as Wes Streeting and Ilford, because behind West Streeting by a tiny, tiny number of votes off the top of our head, single digits, was Liane Mohammed, who was a independent Palestinian parliamentary candidate, not even backed by a party, but nearly beating Wes Streeting, Secretary of State for Health, to such an extent that the issue is subject to legal review. That is how narrow some of their most senior MPs' marginal victory was. And yet they now face in the next general election, in the areas and the seats that were the most marginal, which happened to be the Muslim populated areas. We published all this data in Radical Media Live at the time. And if you go back to majidnawaz.substack.com, you can find all the graphs of the data that we published. Those most marginal seats are the British Muslim heavy populated seats. And it's precisely in those seats that Jeremy Corbyn, Zara Sultana, and other Labour defectors will be running candidates. And they will split the Labour vote down the middle on this Palestine question. This is a trap of Labour's own making. The Gaza September is going to entrap Keir Starmer into a very difficult position, let alone not being able to control his backbench rebellion and voter base rebellion with Zara Sultana. He's got another problem. He can't even control the Blairite end of the fence that he's sitting on, because Tony Blair, in contradiction to Keir Starmer's official government position that they will unilaterally recognize Palestine this month, in contradiction to that, Tony Blair's running around with Trump and Jared Kushner discussing Gaza Riviera projects with them. Keir Starmer can't even control Tony Blair and the Blairite wing of his party. Here it is in the Times on the 29th of August, headlined "What Tony Blair Told Trump at Their White House Meeting on Gaza," subheading "The former Prime Minister told the President," that's Trump, "that Gazans dreamt of becoming the next Dubai and advised that a peace deal was still possible." So let's get this straight. Does Trump's Gaza Riviera fanfare of an announcement, how does that reconcile with Keir Starmer's unilateral declaration of a Palestinian state this month? And where does Tony Blair stand on either one of those grand ideas? Because he seems to be up there in the White House with Trump and Jared Kushner, with them on the Riviera plans. In fact, Tony Blair's own institute contributed to some of the designs for those post-conflict Gaza reconstruction plans. He declares, as is in that article, that he didn't specifically endorse the relocation part of the population, but that he did involve himself in the reconstruction discussions. So on the one hand, there's that. On the other hand, there's the Labour somewhat Blairite Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, announcing that Britain intends to unilaterally recognise Palestine this month. It is all rather confusing, isn't it? Keir Starmer seems to have lost control of both wings of his party, the neocon Blairite wing and the Jeremy Corbyn far-left wing. And the same Times article on the Blair topic reads as follows. So Tony Blair told President Trump that the population of Gaza was desperate for new leadership and dreamt of becoming the next Dubai, the Times understands. The former Prime Minister used his White House visit this week, not Keir Starmer, but Blair, right, goes to meet the president. I mean, just pause there for a second. How hilarious is that? The Prime Minister doesn't go. Tony Blair goes to the White House to meet Trump. Anyway, the former Prime Minister used his White House visit this week to stress that support for Hamas has decreased among Palestinians and to advance his long-term view that they needed to be united under a single government. It is understood. He said that a peace deal was still possible despite the massive death toll since the Hamas attacks of October the 7th triggered Israel's devastating military response. So that's Blair going there to the US to discuss with the Trump administration and Jared Kushner. His relationship with Jared Kushner goes way back. To continue reading from the Times, Blair was brought into Trump's inner sanctum for the consultative meeting on the post-war future of Gaza after advising Steve Witkoff, the president's peace envoy, and Jared Kushner, Ivanka Trump's husband, who has long had interests in the Middle East. Blair is no stranger to the White House and initially met Kushner there to discuss the Middle East in early 2017. Shortly after Trump took office for the first time. He was back there in July on the day that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli Prime Minister, visited Trump to congratulate him on the US bombing of Iran's nuclear enrichment sites. Blair has remained in touch for years with Kushner, who was the architect of the Abraham Accords that helped several Arab states to normalize relationships with Israel. Blair claims that his institute played a significant role in bringing on board the UAE, the first state to sign up in 2020. Now, this is all very interesting because it appears that Tony Blair is pursuing an entirely distinct and different policy to the policy being pursued by his own Blairite Prime Minister and protege, Keir Starmer, in office. All very interesting, because we're now going to point you to a key line in that text from the Times that we just read you. And that is, aside from the fact that it makes it very clear that Blair and Jared Kushner are old buddies and are probably on the same page of the Gaza question, as opposed to what Keir Starmer's gesturing in public, we're going to point you to a key line here. And that is that if you look at the, which paragraph? The last paragraph, second line, and it says Kushner, who is the architect of the Abraham Accords. That's there in the Times article. And what are the Abraham Accords? Well, as regulars of radical media will know, the Abraham Accords are the peace accords, the regional peace accords signed by Trump in his first term. Now, what's very interesting is the Abraham Accords is a regional approach to what is essentially a regional problem. The Gaza problem is not an Israel-Palestine problem. It's a regional Middle Eastern problem involving most of the countries in the region. By way of an example, Hamas is funded by Iran. Hezbollah and Lebanon are funded by Iran. That immediately makes it a regional problem. Iran also funds a militia in Yemen, the Houthi militia. The Saudis and the Iranians were long locked in a civil war in Yemen, funding opposite sides of that conflict. There, you've got three countries immediately: Iran, Saudi Arabia, and Israel. It's a regional problem, and we haven't even got to Egypt and Syria yet. Of course, there's Syria and the Golan Heights problem. So the Abraham Accords were Trump's first term achievement, successful achievement in recognizing that the fact that it's a regional problem requires a regional solution. And they were the initial gestures of such a regional solution. The UAE signed up to the Abraham Accords, showing hope for the first time in many decades that a regional peace deal could be reached. Of course, Trump never got credit for that. Now, we've spoken about this many times on Radical Media, that there is a grand regional settlement for peace coming. It begins at the top with a Trump and Putin agreement, because this is bigger than the Israel-Palestine conflict. These are tectonic plate shifts between NATO allies and BRICS allies in deciding new ways to look at how the Middle East should align. We've explained this many times before. We'll publish again some of the receipts in the Radical Dispatch tomorrow. But Afghanistan's war has concluded with a shift from the Soviet camp, when the Soviets previously invaded Afghanistan, sparking the 80s Al-Qaeda jihad that it used to be called there. And then, of course, subsequent to that, the Taliban war and the 9/11 wars. So that's concluded with Afghanistan now in the NATO camp, and the Taliban pretty much ending up as part of the strategic partners with America and its Defense Department and the UK. And of course, Syria has also shifted from the Soviet camp to the NATO allied camp, backed by Erdogan's Turkey under its new Prime Minister, Ahmed al-Shara, again working with the Saudis, who are also our allies in the Middle East. So that's what's happened in the Middle East. And it's in that context that a deal has been made at the top, in the context of shifting tectonic plates between NATO and former Soviet powers. Putin and Trump have re-agreed how to allow for the natural adjustment of their respective security red lines in the region. And in return for Syria and Afghanistan going into the NATO camp, Putin has been promised the ethnic Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, which will happen. And of course, Putin's trip to Alaska to meet with Trump was all recently part of that. That grand regional settlement for peace, almost like a jigsaw puzzle, begins with Trump and Putin at the top, which is why the Alaska summit was so important. And it filters down to saving Israel for last. And that's where the Gaza conflict comes in, because the Iranians, yes, were backing Hamas, but who was backing the Iranians? The Russians. The Iranian security guarantees were coming from the Russians, and probably good that they were, because, of course, the fact that Trump and Putin are speaking means we pretty much just avoided World War III. So that's what needed to be fixed. Now that that is on the way to being mended, we are soon going to see a grand regional settlement for peace, which includes a revived and resurrected Abraham Accords regional settlement in the Middle East for peace. And I, right now, will ask our regulars to note this and bookmark it here. We will have a major announcement at Radical Media to make soon with regards to the Abraham Accords and what's going to happen next with their resurrection, and indeed a growing call for that framework to be revived in an approach to peace, lasting peace in the Middle East. We will be making a very significant announcement on that front soon. But with all of that context, that's how it should be read, that Tony Blair seems to be following a policy with Jared Kushner and Trump at the White House, which is entirely distinct from the Keir Starmer official announced position of a unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state. Because, by the way, unilaterally recognizing a Palestinian state devoid of any regional negotiations will not go anywhere. All it does is hinder those regional negotiations because, of course, de facto, this is a regional war. And therefore, de facto, only a regional solution can solve it. And therefore, de facto, only regionally inclusive negotiations to solve this de facto regional war will stop the war. And therefore, de jure, any treaties will have to recognize those de facto facts on the ground. So any threats of unilateral recognition simply fall short of recognizing the reality of what's going on. In fact, they're not even playing the same jigsaw puzzle. And so we would caution that Keir Starmer's posturing on all of this is to be ignored. They don't know what's going on, nor does David Lammy, nor does Shabana Mahmood, nor does Keir Starmer. Tony Blair is a bit closer to really what's going on, but of course, even Blair is yesterday's news. The real change is going to happen with a Nigel Farage premiership working with the Trump administration to solve these conflicts globally once and for all. And there is every reason to believe that Trump will achieve this and will get the Nobel Peace Prize for doing so. But that, of course, will happen most likely with a hard graft done in this horrific and chaotic period. It will happen most likely conclude under a Nigel Farage premiership. That is our analysis. And of course, part of what we are going to announce with regards to the Abraham Accords, remember, note this and bookmark this. Part of what we are going to announce, a special announcement on the Abraham Accords topic via Radical Media, involve an understanding from our perspective that much of this movement will happen under a Nigel Farage premiership, who incidentally just had a very successful party political conference with the Emirati ambassador present. So more on that later. But we're going to continue reading from the Times on this. And you can see here to continue there about the depth of the relationship between Blair and Kushner. Kushner revealed the depth of his relationship with Blair at a 2019 Peace to Prosperity Middle East conference, calling him the former prime minister who has spent a lot of time in this region, who has been a good friend to me and a good advisor on a lot of these issues. Make no mistake, Blair is a globalist. But nevertheless, on this Abraham Accords issue and his relationship with Kushner, he is on the right track in seeking to revive and resurrect the regional approach. Of course, a broken clock can be right twice a day, but this is Trump's initiative, not Blair's. It never was Blair nor his allies' initiative. He's of course jumping on those Trump and Kushner coattails. And the person who really deserves to be speaking to Trump on this issue will be PM Farage, which will happen because Blair has been, up until this point, a large part of the problem. But still, if he's riding Trump's coattails on the Abraham Accords, fair play, the coattails of Trump are rather long. So we're going to continue reading from this Times article, again, demonstrating what Blair is up to. The second paragraph. However, that conference highlighted key differences between them as that's between Blair and Kushner, as Blair continued to insist on the need for a two-state political solution, while Kushner emphasized investment. Now, on this note, we're just going to pause reading there from the Times to say that the official UK government position still is a two-state solution, and that's where Blair agrees with Starmer, though clearly he's not following Starmer's unilateral threat position. Blair does agree with Starmer on the official UK position of a two-state solution. However, it's not clear that that's where the Trump administration is any longer. Of course, Israel is no longer there either. And more on exactly what could end up happening when we announce what we intend to announce soon, very soon, on the topic of the Abraham Accords. But for now, we'll leave you in suspense. Continuing to read from the Times. Sir Keir Starmer has annoyed the Trump administration by vowing to declare British recognition of a Palestinian state. That much is quite clear. And of course, what we've demonstrated now is that Blair's not been following that track of Starmer's position, but does follow Starmer's official position, which is the UK official position for a two-state solution. And again, you can see that in the Times there in context, highlighted. However, that conference highlighted key differences between them, as Kushner and Blair, as Blair continued to insist on the need for a two-state political solution, while Kushner emphasized investment. And it's the UAE investment and the Riviera project idea that Kushner is attached to, all part of the Abraham Accords framework. That approach does leave out what to do with the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza, which the official UK government position would say should be a two-state solution. And that's where Blair is. But there are other approaches to this that the Abraham Accords could potentially revive, but they could only occur in a regional context. And again, more on that another time. But it remains to be seen what the current UK ambassador and Starmer appointee, and also former Tony Blair chief Dark Lord, if you like, in his administration, the head of comms for Blair, who's now Lord Peter Mandelson, the current UK ambassador to Washington, D.C. It remains to be seen where he stands on the divergent positions between Starmer and Blair. Starmer's being the threat of a unilateral recognition this month, and Blair's being closer to Jared Kushner, because, of course, we don't know, being a diplomat, what Lord Mandelson thinks on this. But the Times does say British sources in Washington said they could not comment on whether Blair liaised with the government or the UK ambassador, Lord Mandelson, on what he told Trump. So Starmer doesn't appear to know what Blair is up to in Washington, D.C., just as he can't control the left of his party. He seems to have lost control of the Blairite wing at its head as well. Also important to note at this juncture that Lord Mandelson, you will note in that same Times newspaper from today, the Times of London, but also from the New York Times of New York, Lord Mandelson's name is confirmed 100% in court files to have visited Epstein's Island and other Epstein locations on multiple times, something that Lord Mandelson doesn't deny. And of course, it's a subject of great embarrassment for Peter Mandelson, who is on the record being considered Epstein's friend. And of course, that's a relevant piece of information in seeking to determine where Mandelson may sit on this question of Gaza. The Epstein blackmail operation clearly being part of a foreign Mossad honeypot blackmail scheme involving no less than the former Israeli Prime Minister as well, Ehud Barak. So, of course, there are big questions around Mandelson in DC and what he's doing there, because Starmer appointed him after knowing that he was a very close Epstein associate. Mandelson has said he regrets ever having met Epstein, but that doesn't mean he hadn't met him, of course. It means he did meet him. It's just an admission that he did meet him. And of course, we don't know exactly the nature of that relationship between Mandelson, our current UK ambassador to Washington, D.C. But what we do know is that his name has come up. And of course, there's a current threat of releasing the Epstein files and a huge pressure from media in doing so. And those, again, regulars will remember that here on Radical Media, we explained, and again, we'll republish these receipts in tomorrow's dispatch, we explained the Trump administration position at the time, and we said we suspect strongly that the Epstein files were part of the negotiations for seeking peace in the Middle East. And clearly, Mandelson remaining there while Blair is shuttling back and forth, seemingly contradicting the position of his own prime minister, would indicate that the Epstein files are all part and parcel of all of this that's going on in the Middle East to resolve the conflict once and for all. Now, while this has been going on in the background, again, we say Starmer's entrapped himself because he's now so hard on that fence, sitting on the fence, that he's ending up perhaps contracting piles and perhaps even hemorrhoids. But to add to his woes, the Israeli Prime Minister is due to visit. And of course, calls to snub the Israeli president, according to the Times, are nothing but posturing. And the Times, recognizing the crucial moment we're in, rightly states that it's ridiculous to try and argue that the British Prime Minister should snub the Israeli president on his visit. And it gives the reasoning here, and we agree with it, making that very clear. We agree with the Times stance on this. Goes so far as to say radical media officially would endorse the Times on this topic here. And this is why. They explain it as follows. Recent days have seen no shortage of political personages crossing the threshold of Downing Street for unscheduled meetings. By the way, the Palestinian president Mahmoud Abbas is also visiting prior to the Israeli president. So it's not just the Israeli president that Starmer is receiving. Another reason to agree with the Times when they say the following, second line, second sentence, but there is one figure many Labour MPs are determined should not be received there, Israel's President Isaac Herzog. Though Mr. Herzog is not due to arrive in the UK until Wednesday, that's tomorrow, a loud contingent of Sir Keir Starmer's backbenchers have expressed their outrage at the idea that he might be granted a government audience. As yet, no official meeting has been scheduled. The Times continues as follows. Calls to snub Mr. Herzog are mistaken, both on the point of principle and the merits. Again, we agree with this, and we're going to explain why by continuing to read. Mr. Herzog is no pariah. As head of state, he occupies a largely ceremonial role. By contrast with Israel's politically embattled Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, the International Criminal Court has issued no warrant for his arrest, Mr. Herzog, meaning no controversial questions arise as to whether Britain could endorse such a warrant. Israel's president is exactly the kind of figure the UK government should seek to engage and sway. And that is a very sensible commentary, and one that we believe should be the commentary that prevails. Whatever we think of Keir Starmer, and clearly he's a globalist, and clearly he's a weak prime minister, clearly the country is faring far, far worse under him. The Israeli president is coming to the country. Keir Starmer should meet him, because whatever can be done to stop this war as soon as possible surely is a good thing. Credit where credit is due. To continue reading from that, given this is from the Times leader column on the subject of the Israeli president coming to visit, given there is no prospect of Sir Keir Starmer's conditions being met, and that's on Starmer's promises of a Palestinian state, given that there's no prospect of Sir Keir Starmer's conditions being met, and indeed little incentive for Israel's enemies to cooperate in meeting them with the promise of long-desired state recognition in the offing, Labour has trapped itself. As it stands, it will follow through on its pledge at the UN General Assembly meeting this month. That was an unforced error. Though a two-state solution must be the long-term aim, precipitately recognizing Palestine achieves nothing. Doing so squanders a negotiating chip that could have been used to better effect later in the international process and hands an undeserved victory to Israel's opponents. The Prime Minister should reverse course. He should also take note of the bad consequences of international virtue signalling, which in this case has boxed in Britain's government, the posers, and undermined a long-standing ally. There is very little of what we just read to you there from the Times leader we actually disagree with. Starmer has boxed himself in. He has trapped himself by declaring his had, which is a threat to unilaterally recognize Palestine. He's removed a negotiating tool in that regional context, which is the only way a solution will come. The regional context, such as the Abraham Accords, already includes a Palestinian state or milestones to get to a Palestinian state as part of that negotiation framework in the context of the Abraham Accords framework that has already been set up. To take it from there and just unilaterally declare it removes leverage in those negotiations. And so Starmer is in fact torpedoing the only chance for long-term peace in that region, which is the regional negotiations. Unilateral action always undermines collective regional approaches by definition, because it's unilateral. It doesn't come with the permission of the collective. And so we endorse the Times view there. And also we end on this note by stating we do think something big is coming regionally. And as we say, hold this pause here and note this and bookmark it from us. Not only have we, as me personally, as Majid Nawaz and as Radical Media, will we soon be announcing some very important initiatives on that front, the regional approach, but we are of the view firmly that the facts on the ground will soon reflect the benefits of a regional approach too. And in that, concluding, we agree with the views of this final blog piece in Israel Hayom, which is headlined, "Is something big about to happen?" And we say, yes, it is. And this blog, Israel Hayom, agrees. We've been saying, yes, it is, for a long time, as our regulars will know. A grand regional settlement for peace is coming. Facts on the ground are simply going to mandate it. But we also, as Radical Media, and me specifically, Majid Nawaz, will be also announcing something in that regard, very significant, very shortly, hopefully this week. But meanwhile, to read from Israel Hayom, the subheading, Derma's shuttle diplomacy, and Trump's remark that the war could end, quote, and this is a direct quote from Trump, saying about a week ago, he said this, that the war could end, you can see it there in the headline in the subheading, within 2 or 3 weeks, end of quote. Recall the days leading up to the Abraham Accords. Meanwhile, Netanyahu's most important minister already has a retirement date, and more changes are looming in the prime minister's inner circle. A key segment from that blog, which is telling you that they think, and we agree with it, and we think something big is coming. It's going to involve the Abraham Accords, both in terms of facts on the ground and regional negotiations, and also separately, unrelated to that news in Israel Hayom, we also have major news coming on that front of the Abraham Accords, both for Radical Media and for me personally. Something big is coming. We're going to read to you a section from Israel Hayom. Almost all of Netanyahu's consultations during the 23 months of war have been with these 4 ministers, who, by the way, are about to all quit at the same time. Who will he turn to now? Of all the departures, Derma's is by far the most consequential. He holds all the most critical security portfolios: Iran, Syria, Gaza, and the hostages. By January the 1st, he's supposed to complete 2 key tasks he vowed not to leave unfinished: ending the war and expanding the Abraham Accords. We're going to leave you with that thought. Remember, we will return to this Abraham Accords topic very soon, very, very soon, perhaps sooner than you may expect, hopefully. It will involve an announcement from us, something that we hope many of you will receive with happily in terms of news. And of course, as that news article there indicates, there are some regional developments we expect to see very soon that will also give hope for peace. In that regard, a grand regional settlement for peace is coming. And it's not the Keir Starmer approach. It is the regional approach that will, in the end, secure an end to this horrific conflict in Gaza. You have been listening to The Radical, Majid Nawaz. The written version of this stream will be published in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch as usual. That can be found at majid.nawaz@substack.com. And of course, we will also, for premium members of Radical Media, republish this stream as a podcast video audio file. We encourage all subscribers to become premium subscribers. Without your support, we cannot continue this work, this strategic and analytical media commentary. Until next time, thank you very much.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength. Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge. Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.